happy to lead the meeting. It's basically just for information. So I think what we'll do is we'll email everybody what we're going to present, and you can come. We'd love to have you come. I'm not telling you not to come, but if you need to take a break, you might be able to take a break at that time. Because the next two meetings in February and March, we really need everybody there to go over the chapters to get this almost finished. Are you started, Joan?
It's on.
It's on. Okay. So we're going to start. Janine has it up on the screen, and I'm going to go through the draft goals and recommendations. Janine's going to support me as well, just to try to keep us to an hour. I hope to get this finished in an hour. And then we've got some other task force members that want to talk about their ideas, and they can have the second hour to do that. So everybody focus and let's get it done. So we're on the draft goal. We're in Campbellsville. The priority subject is Campbellsville Village Enhancements. And we've already gone through branding, which is the first goal. We've gone through historic resources. We've gone through walkability and traffic calming, although Chuck might touch on that later in the second hour. And what we haven't done is land use. And that's partially because I held it up. I did go through all the documents with Chester County about fair share, and I talked to Mark Thompson along with Joan and Mary about fair share, and we do meet our fair share for HDR. And what HDR is high density housing specifically directed towards mobile home parks. Okay, and so we have one parcel, I think it's two, it's Paradox, it's the Vineyard, which is our HDR. And we do meet our criteria. We meet our criteria with Chester County's analysis using huge growth numbers, which I don't agree with. As you saw in my email, I think that we are only growing. I know we're only growing at an average of 4, 5, 6 building permits a year. That would never get us to that amount of population that Chester County recommended that we would be. So long and short, we're really good for that. We're fine. And we're fine for high density in our HDR and in our commercial. So we don't need to zone anything to satisfy fair share. It's satisfied, it's done. But that being said, we've talked about land use in the village, about how we could do village type uses as well as businesses, maybe do mixed, which we would have businesses on the bottom and we would have apartments on the top. That configuration is allowed under commercial, but it's not by right. So one of the draft recommendations would be to change that and make it by right, which makes a lot of sense. So let's go through one by one. Now I'll read it, I guess, and then people can speak up and see how they feel about it. I also have Paul Lagasse's comments on it. I searched him out because he's the head of HARB and he's the head of the Historical Commission as well as a resident of the village. So I have these two that I can discuss as we go through them all. Okay, so the land use. Consider zoning changes that would allow for additional types of land use options for Campbellsville as a viable village and township community center. Consider areas near Campbellsville as primary areas for any planned growth in the township. And again, I want to say this is a plan, so we're not saying that we're going to change the zoning now. We're saying that if in the future we do start to grow and the township does become a center, a village center, that we would like to have that type of housing in the village. So the first recommendation is examine how to change the village district to promote compatible scales of village oriental uses and adaptive reuses of historical resources. For example, permit small scale commercial uses of under 2,500 square feet gross leasable floor space by right. So what Janine means by that is, of course, we don't want any big box stores in the village. We don't want any very large, entities. We want boutiques and we want bakeries, just like we did with the survey. So I'll open the floor for comments. Any comments? Okay, I'll see, let's see, Paul. So Paul recommended that we insert there to promote and sustain it as a viable village and township community. So I'm not going to go over the wordsmithing now. Janine and I can do that later on, but he agreed that this is a recommendation that he would support. The second one is examine the village district boundaries and determine whether boundaries should include all of the National Register eligible historic district, Act 167, local historic district, and other possible areas. Paul also agreed with that. There also is some wordsmithing there that we can add. Paul, are you on? Paul Lagassier is. So if Paul, you can speak up if you would like to add.
No, I mean, I just think the only thing I would say if I'm coming through is that the smallest part of this is the National Register District. The Act 167 is actually what the township enacted, and it's larger. And other possible areas would be, if we wanted to create a village district that included, say, surrounding buffering properties. So that it's not that's more about the zoning rather than expanding the historic district. It's important to keep that in mind. That what's being talked about here is a zoning issue.
And some communities that I've worked in also, what they've done is they have a V district, and then they'll basically have something that's the equivalent of a VB, a village buffer district. So they're doing exactly what Paul said, but they're handling the two districts slightly differently. The village buffer district would basically be a buffering that would be somewhere between what was neighboring, whether it's the ag districts and the village versus just the straight up village district. So that's another option too.
So it has different zoning consequences to it? Okay.
Yeah, basically, let's just say the V district is this 2,500 square foot leasable floor space. Maybe the VB district goes up to 3,500 leasable floor space. So it's branching out in a buffer and creating maybe bigger uses, but maybe larger lot sizes to get out to what it is in more rural areas of the township with larger lot sizes. It's just an idea.
Yeah, looking at the zoning map though, what surrounds the village is there's some commercial in there. To the south, there is some ag, and there's also, what is it, light industrial?
Yeah, light industrial and some SU.
What is it, Joan?
Limited industrial.
Limited, and then SU.
Yeah. Well, and that's also an interesting thing. And talking to Paul, when we took the TND and made it into ag colors, because it's all preserved, what kind of struck us was there's some small SU that's next to the village that might want to be part of the village. Kathy, one is your brick house is special use. Did you know that?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And then the one that's the historical house next door to you, just down a little bit across from Jeff Coates. That's also special use.
Yeah.
And, I found that also in some of the other areas where we changed the preserved land back into ag lands, and these little pockets of other zonings popped out at us, which Janine calls spot zoning. Kathy, I mean, be candid. What do you feel about, what that zoning, does that help you having special use? Or, I mean, because I'm not making a recommendation that we should take it away. I'm just want to investigate it to see what might be a better way to handle that.
Well, I've never thought we bought it because we like the special use. So we're happy with that. But in this attempt to fortify the village and give the village more options, we've never had a discussion about what would we like it to be changed to? Could it be changed to something more advantageous? We're open to that conversation.
Okay, so at some point we want to have the conversation. Now, the historical house that's next to you,
yeah,
Paul, you said that just became
So that, as a result of the 896 section 106 review process, that suddenly became class 1. And so putting the class 1 historic property as special use struck me as incongruous at best and counter to promoting its preservation. It's not to say that I want to freeze out any possible uses for it, but special use seems a peculiar designation for what is now a Class 1 historic property, and only one of 3 outside the village itself.
Janine, do you have any thoughts on how that might be handled, or in the past, how it's been handled when you've had something like that happen, or you haven't ever had it happen before?
I mean, as I was saying, other municipalities that I've worked with either find a way to incorporate it into village zoning, or they might do an overlay, or they might do this village buffer concept. Remember, special use is just a name,
Right.
and village buffer is just a name. So anything can be permitted in it that's appropriate. But they might try to do that to get some of these outliers that surround what we're going to call the more traditional historic, village, to capture them, but maybe expand the types of uses to be quasi village and quasi more rural landscape. So somewhere a transition zone effectively.
So
and some of those special uses would fall in a transition zone. I mean,
Right.
that is the nature of that district.
Well, special use is an odd zoning thing. So Kathy, you said there were some attributes that you liked about special use. So we can, think about it and talk to Matt and figure out what attributes you like about it and see if we can't structure some sort of zoning buffer that would, be a village enhancement as well as, connect you to the light industrial and as a buffering.
Yep.
Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. Also in the village, and now we're talking when we removed the TND, the McMaster house was left as the only TND on the corner because it was part of it. So that should go in as village. Janine, also, I mean, we're talking like these properties are not owned by people. How do we approach people when we say, oh, you used to be TND, but we're going to change you to village? Does Joan go over and have a meeting with them and talk about the differences? Because again, it's not adversary. I'm not advocating that it's a takeover or anything like that, but just trying to clean it up because there's no TND anymore. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, there's a couple different approaches. I mean, if you're going to change zoning, there is generally a robust outreach process.
Okay.
So it's not just, hey, we're changing zoning.
Hello. Yeah.
Hello, we're changing zoning. But I've worked with municipalities even before that official process where they start holding forums and doing polling. So for example, I'll just give a good example. It's for ag, but it's a simple example. A municipality I worked with wanted to do ag zoning. So they did 2 things. One is we had an ag forum where we invited every agricultural and every larger parcel that could be agricultural in the township to a forum to talk about what ag zoning was and wasn't. And then after that forum, the township literally went door by door or phone call by phone call and talked to each individual person about what they felt about it. And at the end of the day, most people wanted it, if not all people wanted it. So they decided to do ag zoning. So they went through basically a 2-step process. One that was more, more of a public forum. And then one was let's have a private conversation about this at the end of the day. So that's one example.
Okay.
That could be done. But yes, certainly, even if that isn't done, certainly when any zoning changes happen, there's a public process that has to be done, under the municipality's planning code. So
should we put that in as a draft recommendation that we want to approach and reach out to landowners in the village that might become part of this buffering? You want to add that as a recommendation?
Yeah, we can phrase it sort of like we did for the ag, where we talk about having an ag, forum. But yeah, we can add that.
Right. And also add that we
want
to have an outreach to the people that are in those couple people like Kathy and the Historic House and the McMaster House, where things seemingly, might be changed, but to have a conversation. I'd be more willing to have an open conversation, with them. Do we include the PC, Board of Supervisors? Who's included in those informal conversations?
I think we're now getting into an action item under the recommendation.
Okay.
I think the recommendation is general. You're
Good
examining
point.
the current village district boundaries. Now, how you examine them, now we're starting to get into that.
Okay. Got it. All right. Skip it. All right. Move on, Nan. All right. Let's see. So, C.
Nan, before you move on,
Yep.
just a clarification. So I don't see the traditional neighborhood zone under, what we're allowing currently versus what we don't allow, compared to village. Is that was the concept, is maybe turning that into village?
The T&D, you mean, the old T&D?
Yeah.
Well, because the T&D, we turned it mostly in the zoning map, the fixed zoning map, we turned it into ag. Can we put that up, Janine? I think I have it if you don't.
I'll put it up in 1 second. I just want to get this down
Yeah,
quickly.
Okay. Because the T&D, Chuck, the T&D can't survive because the way it was outlined, there's nothing left to do it. It's all eased with the exception of the brick house, the small brick house, the McMaster house, and the historical house. That's all that was left. And those two were never T&D, they were special use. So does that make sense, Chuck? Am I making sense? Or are we talking in circles?
My question really was, what is allowed in the TND?
Oh, that's a question for Joan. You want to? Joan, I mean, the TND what I recall was conventional homes, townhomes, commercial, large, big box store.
Mixed uses, different types of housing, townhouses, detached, single-family houses, apartments, stores.
So it is relatively close to, maybe its closest relative would be the village, would be village zoning?
I think it's mostly big
Oh,
stuff.
okay.
No, what made it? what
So are
made
you
it-
saying that we might want to consider changing the village zoning to TND?
No.
I wasn't, no, I,
Okay.
yeah, I wasn't making a statement. I was asking a question.
Okay, well, Joan can look at it. But as I recall that when it was coming in, when we were doing the stipulation, it was a large area. I mean, it was, it's kind of a smaller version of what you saw, the one in Exton that has big box stores. It kind of had a village feel because you walk through it, but it allowed for big box stores, townhomes, a couple conventional homes,
What made
duplexes.
it, if I could jump in there,
There you go.
what's made it special was it was to try to replicate Main Street. And what does that is the lower floors of the building have businesses, business fronts, and then the upstairs has residential apartments and living space. So that's unusual today to build a building that has residential and commercial in the same structure. And that's what the Main Street feel was. There wasn't really too many big box stores, but it did allow for stores, individual stores, but no freestanding, what do you call the lots in front of like Acme and Lowe's over in Avondale? What do you call it?
Pads? You mean like a pad or something?
Yeah, no pad sites. That just, freestanding McDonald's. It was try to incorporate it into a main street. But we learned that you need a lot of acreage to make it work. And what we had, the 130 or whatever it was, wasn't, it was barely enough. So that's all preserved now. So I wouldn't say we really have space for a T&D in our village.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
And so because it's ag, that's why we were thinking that we would put it back as ag zoning. But again, that's something that we could discuss later because that's an action item. But the T&D. Okay, so where are we?
Dan, I don't know if it's part of it, but when the special use, that allowed for some things that, we're required to have. So we've got to make sure we have enough of it somewhere. So be careful of changing it into something else.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. But also remember that, because it's called special use, those types of allowances don't have to be in special use. You can put them in other zoning as long as you allow for them. That's all it is. You just have to allow. Don't get hung up on what it's called.
No, that's what I'm saying. Just make sure it's allowed somewhere.
Yeah. The kind of scary thing about special use is it was the catch-all, because then it has one thing where you can put anything in there that wasn't included in our zoning that you wanted to. So that kind of makes it kind of a wild card.
And all zoning ordinances have that. It's usually in the industrial district. That's the more typical spot, but
yeah,
we don't really have one.
well, we have the light industrial.
If I read the village zoning, it looks like right now one couldn't have a townhome in the village by our current zoning. Is that your intention, or am I just reading that wrong?
Let me look.
It would seem like the village would have maybe these townhomes or small apartment complexes, and that's kind of what we want to, put in there, right?
Right. Well, Janine, we had in one of the draft recommendations that we were going to move it and make it into, by right, to have a situation where you could have stores on the bottom and apartments on the top. It's now back, like in conditional use. So I can tell you, village, you can have agriculture, single family, 2-family detached, 2-family attached, nonprofit parks, municipal uses, that's all by right. Village,
So
customary
just say-
residential.
By right, I would say that maybe that just be expanded. If we're going to really consider this a village, it should have that higher housing density, since we don't want to use HDR, but higher housing density for that area. I don't know, that's just my opinion, that it should encourage.
Well, I think we agree, but we talked about doing it with commercial on the bottom and having apartments on the top.
I don't care how they do it. If they
Okay.
want commercial on the bottom, fine. If they don't, so be it.
Janine, where was that recommendation? Is that in the last part? I know you have it.
It's in the last part, I think, when we're
Okay.
talking about.
Okay, all right, well, let's keep going here.
Are we talking about having a sewer system that ultimately the township would need to take over for the village?
That would be determined by what kind of housing the developer puts in there. Joan, it's required to have a sewer system in the village by putting in what type of housing?
In the village?
Yep. No, it's commercial, which would be in the village.
Oh, okay, wait a minute.
I don't think it works like that. Would the
It
developer?
does in commercial.
What do you mean?
The Act 537 plan that the township has, which is a sewage facility plan, determines how the sewer is completed in a hierarchy standpoint. So in X area of the township, X type of sewer is the desired sewer type for X type of use, is how the 537 plan works. And if anybody's going to change that, then there has to be an official amendment to that plan, which has to go to DEP and the township for approval, and the county.
So
And it's a whole
we're
ball
at
of
that
wax.
point there, Janine, because that's from 2002. And
But
Chuck, that's what I was trying to rather ineffectively, I'm sure, say, is that the village needs a sewer system to support all these uses. And the 537 kind of played into that. So at the end of this, all these draft recommendations are fine, but at the end of it, F or whatever it is like, we have to have a sewer system down 896, which is the 537 plan. Or
We
most of
did
it.
cover the sewer, I think, at the last meeting. We did talk a lot about that under infrastructure.
Yeah, that. Okay. Yeah, I'm just saying
did
it's like
cover-
all of
yeah,
these
we
are
did cover
stipulated.
that.
Yeah, they're all stipulated on that.
Right, you have to have sewer and water, of course, for anything to happen.
Okay, so I'm looking at the commercial district, and it says here that it does say, Joan, help me on this. I'm on page 22 of 3 of the commercial under purposes. It talks about community and public sewer if you're going to put in minimum lots of 18,000 square feet, multifamily on 5 acres. You can do individual sewer if you have lot size of 30,000 square feet.
That's correct.
Yeah, so if you put in residential, so this is what I'm saying. So if you put residential in there, right? Multifamily, you need to put, it looks like you need to put a community public sewer in there.
In the commercial?
Yeah,
Okay, if you look, I don't know, you have a different version of the ordinance. You don't have the
got it
most.
off your website.
Okay, well, what I'm looking at here, it says multifamily, individual sewer is not applicable, that you have to go to community sewer and you need a minimum of 5 acres for multifamily in the commercial district.
And you must do sewer.
Yes, because you would have to do community or public sewer.
So
Okay.
who is you? Who has to put in the sewer, the developer or the township?
Well, it says it has to be community or public, so I
No,
would,
but
if it's
who has to pay to
community,
install it?
pardon me?
Who has to pay to install it?
It would have to be the developer, but in the case of Lexington Point, that's getting turned over to the township. We have to take ownership of that.
All right,
I
but they're
thought
paying for it. They're
we-
paying for it.
They pay for it, but we have to run it as a township,
No, we take ownership.
take ownership, but then we have to find somebody to run it.
Yes.
Okay.
So is it clear that we as residents don't take responsibility for somebody else's sewer?
Meaning
mean,
what? Meaning,
Meaning, well, even Lexington, are the rest of us all of a sudden gonna start to support Lexington's sewer system
No, they have a
No.
in
special
addition
tax.
to our own?
They have a
No.
special tax.
They'll have yearly fees to pay in support of the system there.
Is that what you're
But what you're probably thinking about is years ago, when Paul and I were supervisors, and I think before, DEP came in and was requiring that we put in a sewer for the village. And that, I don't know why, but it went away. And if they were to do that, somebody had to pay for the sewer, which was gonna be the township or the residents. Is that what you're thinking of?
That's what I'm asking about. Yeah, because, you know, most of the municipalities around here, they carved themselves out separately because they had sewers and the surrounding areas didn't have sewers. I just don't want to all of a sudden see that we're getting double whammied with development and paying for the sewer for it.
So if a developer comes in to develop the property, then that developer, he or she is required to put in the sewer. And then just like Lexington Point, once it's in and installed, the township has to take it over and be responsible for it, which would include finding somebody to quote unquote run the sewer system.
Yeah, but man, that's not what the 537 is at all. Like, I don't understand how we're talking about the village and you're saying the developer is going to put in the sewer, because the
That's
sewer is
required.
continuously all the way down 896, and they may have a connection fee of 100 grand or something like that, like Paul was saying.
Wait, what?
Nobody's talking
Putting a
about.
sewer down 896. What are you talking about?
The 537, Joan, the 537 plan is that we have sewer running along 896.
No, that's not true. 537
Okay.
plan said we would have it in Campbellsville.
And it was
That's-
for to sewer the village of Campbellsville. And we made a deal with DEP that if everyone in the township pumps their systems every 3 years, they will let us, you know, if the rest of the township is healthy sewer wise, they'll let us go with that for a while.
I don't
So
mean
that's
the
one
whole
of the reasons
896.
we're
I
after
just mean the
everyone to
village.
pump.
Yeah, just the village section of 896. That's it. That's all I meant.
Oh, okay, not all of 896.
Yeah, and then they would have a connection fee of 100 grand or whatever, but clearly township would put that in, that 6-inch or 12-inch line, and then they would pay 100 grand or 150 grand or whatever, depending upon the number of units they put in. And that's kind of the benefit of the village, is that, hey, okay, you have to deal with all these problems, but you get sewer. I don't know.
Well, I still want to say that the sewer at this point is going to be put in by a developer. And if the rest of the village wants to hook into that sewer, that's something that would have to be negotiated by the township. And so let's move on. Let's move on. We're half an hour in and we're not even finished with the first one. Okay, so do we do C? Where are we, Janine?
We're on C.
Okay. Local historic district regulatory boundaries are smaller than the National Register eligible historical district boundaries. To keep village character harmonized throughout the village area, consider ordinance provisions for new construction to complement existing village character, streetscape, and to comply with architectural and streetscape standards. Any comment on that?
Yeah, strike that first sentence. It's wrong.
Okay, go ahead, speak up.
It's the local historic district regulatory boundaries are and have always been larger than the National Register boundaries. And with the recent Section 106, the National Register district, eligible district boundaries are actually quite tight, and in some cases smaller than the parcel that a house is on.
We're going to have to double check our mapping then, Paul, because the only reason we came up with this recommendation is that National Register map that our office has produced seems to show the National Register eligible boundaries as much bigger than the local historic district boundaries. So we're going to have to correct that map then.
Well, the one I'm working on is correct. I don't know what you're looking at, but the one I've been working on with Colin Murtaugh is correct. And there's a
we mapped what the state has. The state gives us a database, and then we map it on our website. And so you can look on our website. And so we're using what the state has in their database. So I guess what I'm saying to you is if that's wrong, then that needs to be corrected.
But the state is the one that set the eligible boundaries just recently. So I'm kind of perplexed as to why that should be the case.
Okay, we'll have to talk about that offline, but I just wanted to note we have to straighten out the boundaries no matter.
Yeah, but that is wrong.
Yeah, do you want to make a note on that just to remind us to do that? Okay, while she's doing that, we'll move on to D. So we kind of talked about this when we talked about the historical house that's in special use, about doing buffer areas. And I think everybody's in agreement that we might want to take a look at that. So we'll leave that recommendation as it is. Any other comment on that? All right, and E is determine if high density housing opportunities exist within and near the village, both to provide for future population growth in a growth managed manner and to provide a readily available and nearby population base for village businesses and other amenities. I think we should keep that in there just to say that there are areas around, Barry alluded to it, and that we can identify them, but we're not going to change the zoning, just to point out to the supervisors that there are areas that, might benefit from high density in the future. Any other comments?
Because the village, like you just read, it's only like 2-family or something like that. And we really need to expand that to help allow, 3-story structures, not trinities per se, like, row housing, but it needs to accommodate to make it profitable and to bring that investment into the village area. So I just want to say that we can have this in as E, but then we have to have zoning in the village specification that says, okay, you can build an apartment or a townhome, not just like 2-family homes.
I think that's in the last section that we're going to get to tonight. We talked about Lansing. So let's move on. Let's just stop one section. A priority subject, agriculture, draft goal 3. We talked about the ag security area. Joan, did you find out whether our farms are mostly in the ag security area?
They are from, as far as I know, Nan. I mean, all the known farms that I'm aware of are in it.
Are there possible other areas that could enter though, Joan? Do you have all the parcels captured?
I mean, there might be somebody doing something smaller, that I'm not aware of. I mean, if they want to put a horse farm in it, I'm not, you know what I mean? But the farmers that I'm aware of are in the ag security area.
So maybe we'll just leave it as changed to encourage landowners. I don't think it hurts to continue encouraging people to enter the district.
Well, let's use the word continue to encourage, because that's what we're doing. We've been doing that for a while because all of our farms that are preserved are in there. I know that when we were doing some of the grants, we had to, hustle and get them in there. So, okay, let's move on after she does that to, we are priority subject resource protection is green infrastructure, draft goal 3. Open space preservation. There we go. Continue to support and work cooperatively with other entities to permanently protect priority open space resources. The first recommendation is include in the duties of the Township Park of the PRO board to monitor, advise, coordinate, and serve as a liaison and first point of contact on potential open space preservation opportunities. So let's define open space preservation opportunities. Would that include conservation easements on private properties. It would include the township purchasing ground for protection. What exactly do we feel, what's the definition of open space preservation opportunities?
The intent when it was drafted was to follow up on the public comment. And there was much public comment on the fact the township needed an entity like this, which happened to be created very recently. And then there was public comment saying, once that entity is created, then somebody needs to keep an eye out for possible everything you described, Nan, all varieties of open space preservation opportunities to then get in on the ground floor of helping a landowner pursue, various opportunities. And there's various ways it can be done, open space preservation. Rather take more of an active role. The township maybe can't offer funding, but certainly maybe this board could offer technical assistance and just helping somebody through what's a rather complicated process. So that's what the intent was for this.
So where does ag preservation, is that its own category when we talk about ag preservation and working with Chester County? So that would be different.
It is. We have a
No, I know that. I'm just
Okay.
trying to clarify what open space is. So I guess what I'm
Open
saying
space
is, so what I would like to
everything
have,
but ag preservation.
but I'd like to, so somebody reading this understands what open space preservation opportunities are. So in parentheses, put conservation easements and natural resource preservation. Would that make sense?
Yeah, and remember, these are just the recommendations. We're going to have a description and definitions and all that business. So I'll just put a note, but this isn't going to be what it's going to look like in the end. There'll be more text.
All right, just to make sure that it's clear, that's all. Because I think people say, oh, I love open space, but I'm not sure everybody understands what what open space is. So any other comments on that? Paul, do you have any comments? Saying you're all pro. Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Yep, okay. Continue to coordinate with property owners, Land Conservancy, and Chester County Department of Parks and Preservation, as well as neighboring municipalities to promote and facilitate open space preservation projects. Any comment on that?
No.
Consider how to leverage funding for additional open space preservation. I would like to add with the leverage, I'm just a little sensitive about that, how to leverage through grant opportunities, funding for additional open space. Can we put that in there? So people don't think we're going to run out and float another bond. Any other comments on that? So the D is, it says develop a prioritization for remaining available tracks that could be preserved. I'm fine with that. Any other additions or comments?
No.
And E is address land stewardship and maintenance in open space projects. Comments? Okay. All right, so let's move on to historic and scenic resources. Okay. Retain and protect historic and scenic resources and landscapes from degradation or loss to preserve the traditional rural context of township heritage and character. The first recommendation is to continue the outreach about historical resources with print and online information. Consider partnering on events and programs centered on township history and historic resources and landscapes. Consider ways that historic heritage interpretation can be incorporated into themes of agritourism and recreational destination, including historic markers and panels. Comments? Paul Agassi, did you have comments on here? I'm looking on my sheet.
No, not on that one.
Okay.
So
Well, speak
it's
up.
always tough. It's
I'm
always
sorry.
tough to, it's a fun objective to retain and protect historic and scenic resources, but we really have no authority or rules or any way to do that other than wish it.
You could have ways to do it. The township chooses not to on a township-wide basis, but there are strategies that other townships actively use in Chester County.
Like,
Pardon?
could you give us a quick example?
Sure. A very straightforward example is township-wide historic resources zoning.
That's a very good idea, especially as we go to trails and everything like that. You're going to need a way to protect and identify these destination sites, whether they be the old meeting house or a cemetery or something like that, that you need some authority, like, you know, to protect those areas.
And incentives. A lot of communities I work with will permit additional uses and incentives to preserve historic resources. So maybe in a district where you couldn't have a bed and breakfast, for example, you can now have a bed and breakfast if it's in a historic resource. And that's a huge economic incentive to preserve the resource and also, you know, the additional cost of having that resource. There's definitely strategies.
So can we leave the draft recommendation like this and talk about strategies when we get to action steps? Janine?
Yes, and this is an example, Nan and everybody, consider historic resource zoning and so that incentivize.
Okay.
So that's an example. So yeah.
So when we write it up, then we can have the action steps that we're all hungry to get.
Right. Yeah, there will be action steps for each of these. Remember that this isn't the be all end all.
Right. Okay.
This is more of a framework for what it's going to look like.
I would just mention that historic overlay type zoning was strongly shot down when the historic district was created, and I suspect that community attitudes have not changed significantly.
And why were they so opposed to it? Do you recall?
Keep your hands off my property.
Oh, right. It's mine, not yours.
They did not want to have to deal with a harb-like situation in addition to regular zoning, period.
And you wouldn't have a harb-like situation because you can't have a harb in the municipality's planning code for zoning. Like that's an impossible.
No, but you do get the historic district making inputs, recommendations, potentially. People wanted nothing to do with it. It was a third rail.
Okay.
There was a couple that has a big white barn that was especially vocal that really stirred everything up.
Who has a historical place.
Yeah.
Usually when you're offering incentives, that's how most municipalities start to preserve their resources. They offer zoning incentives and, you know, not as much of what you're talking about on in terms of that detailed level of, you know, architectural review. There's a number of different ways you can do it. I'm not saying it's going to work in the township, but there are different ways you can do it.
Well, one of the, sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry.
One of the draft recommendations could be looking at, rather than saying we're going to do a blanket zone, just saying looking at strategies to incorporate into Franklin Township zoning so that we can encourage historic preservation. Right, because right now, one of the action items that we do not have on the table is to have somebody actually correlate that for the board to consider. So that's something that we could begin to actually do. So I don't know if that's.
I think that's a good idea. My only concern is this is supposed to be a implementable comp plan. And if we leave it that open-ended, then when it comes time. Yeah, when it comes time to do that, nobody's going to know what that means, and somebody probably going to be ignored.
Yeah, gotcha.
Personal list.
If you don't like, I mean, we can remove this and, you know, do something different.
No, I think incentivizing is fine. It's just, you know, any kind of overlay, they pushed all kinds of buttons.
Yeah.
Incentivizing, I'm really good with.
So for me, Paul, I think the to-do item is to do the homework as the board to come up with or look at strategies to do this, right? So that we know that, I mean, I am on the board. I know this is coming, so I should put this on the to-do list to have perhaps a member of our staff to go look at what do other townships do to strategize about historic zoning, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, are you hearing all this, Joan? When he says a member of our staff, I'm looking at your little image on the screen.
He just, I know, I
just connected in the sewer.
I'm sure
that's
incentivizing. Clapping.
No, I mean, this can, things do exist out there, but sometimes it's really hard to pull out. Like I've read a couple things where Janine sent me some information on townships that do this. So some of it is not as obvious as you think it is. And so it may be more about being open to what can be done, even if it's not something we would traditionally be encouraging in terms of what's in the zoning. One of the things I noticed with surprise and a certain amount of pleasure as I went through the review of the map, and I was trying to pin down what the various addresses for some of these places were, is that we have a barn that's been divided into apartments. And so from the road, you have a barn, but it can no longer function as a barn, but it's serving very good use as apartments. And it's also meeting a certain amount of affordable housing at the same time. So something like that,
Perfect
to my
example.
mind, is an attractive approach to
And that would be a good example of an incentive, Paul.
Right.
If
And
you
so-
had a zoning district where you didn't allow multifamily uses, let's say a base zoning district, and then you have a barn, let's say it's your AR district. If you have a historic resource, you would allow multifamily in it, which is a huge incentive to preserve a building because now you're getting multiple units.
Right.
It makes it more cost effective.
So I don't want to bog down the conversation because I think this is a good conversation for another time where we can focus on it. But I have maybe a quick question is when you have sort of a perfect storm solution like this, where you have a barn and developer comes in and puts apartments in, how much of it that is your zoning and how much of it is you found a interesting developer who wants to do something like that at that location? So like, because we have a lot of buildings like that around, abandoned barns and old sheds and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of times the developer comes in and buys the land and just levels the shed.
Right.
So is it something where we seek out partners or we get lucky, or, I mean, maybe it's all of the above?
I think it's all the above.
Yeah.
What I've had developers say to me, numerous, developers of different, smaller commercial developers, larger businesses, the end of the day, most developers, generally speaking, just want to know what the rules are effectively and what the incentives are, and then try to figure out their proposal based on that. And I'm not trying to be idealistic and say, oh, if you allow multifamily and barns, everybody's going to preserve the barn. But if it's very straightforward, just saying, look, if you preserve this barn, we'll give you extra units. And it's a very matter of fact. It's not, well, maybe we'll do this, maybe we'll do that. Yeah. I've had developers say at least there's a better shot at getting that building preserved because it's just, it's right there. It's black and white. It's not a mystery of what they have to do.
Right.
But I would say, to answer your question, Dave, it's a little bit of all the above, and it really depends on the person, and it depends on the property also.
Right.
And it depends on the structure. So I think there's a bunch of factors involved.
Okay, so I think that what we're agreeing is that the draft recommendation for B is a good one, and we'll investigate it further as we get into the chapter use. So can we move on to C? Promote the Historical Commission as a resource and liaison to assist property owners in preserving and rehabilitating their historic structures, including information about grant or technical assistance opportunities. I think that's a great idea. Any other comments? All right, let's move on to D. Apply to become a certified local government, which opens up PHMC historical resource related funding opportunities. All right, I'm on the Historical Commission, but I don't know. What is a certified local government?
A certified local government is a federal program, actually, that's administered by the state Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. That's what PHMC stands for. And if a municipality meets certain thresholds, and to summarize very quickly, the thresholds are you have a survey and you're doing something to preserve your historic resources through planning and through regulations, then you can apply to become something called a certified local government, which sounds a lot more ominous than maybe it is. And that opens up funding opportunities to you and a partnership between the state and the federal level, basically saying, hey, we're a municipality, we're interested in historic preservation, and we're serious about it, you know, we're putting it on paper, not just saying we're interested about, we're putting on paper through these different programs we've already created.
And the funding is for what? What do you get to use it for?
The funding could be anything from planning to certain brick and mortar.
Okay, all right. Anybody have a problem with leaving that in? Okay, let's move on. Complete and maintain an updated historical township resource atlas, which we're doing at the very moment. The historic research survey, we already have one, so strike that. We've done that on E.
However, I'd be fine with them joining us to continue to update the historic resource survey.
Updated in what way? 'Cause
Well,
It needs to be constantly updated.
Right. We need to review what happens to our buildings, even if they're not.
Oh,
subject
okay,
to hard
yeah,
review.
all right. Well,
Lose them.
that's a good point.
At some point, we need to consider whether it's worth adding buildings that are now over 50 years old, which were not over 50 years old at the time, et cetera.
Okay, so we can leave complete and maintain not only the resource atlas, but add the historic research survey. Leave it in there. Okay. Let's move on to F. Identify through a scenic resources and intrusions analysis, and then work to protect scenic vistas, roads, corridors, and landscapes from adverse visual impacts. Oof. I'm fine with that. And I don't want to get into the weeds and say how we're going to do that, but that might be something that was going to be difficult to do. But let's leave it in for now. And when we get to talk about the action steps, we'll find out how doable it is. Focus on any new development in specific areas and at a scale compatible with township rural character. Again, it's kind of fluffy, but it's nice. Anybody have comments on that? Okay, let's keep going. We got 7 minutes to finish a page and a half. We're going on to page 10. Okay. Trying to think about how I can do this the most organized way. So everybody's read this, I guess. So there's lots of draft recommendations. So we'll just go through and I'll say like 1A, which is we want to direct development away from the rural areas and environmental sensitive and constrained lands, and direct the growth in and around Campbellsville, which we've talked about several times. So everybody's in agreement with that, I guess. Okay. B, we've also talked about focus small scale business uses and mixed commercial residential uses around Campbellsville. Does everybody agree with that? C, we've kind of discussed this about, and that's the way our zoning is now, focus industrial and other commercial uses further out of Campbellsville along 896. We don't really talk about other commercial uses because all the commercial uses are in Campbellsville. Light industrial is outside of the Campbellsville.
And could I go back to 1A for a second?
Sure.
Rather than say direct the development, favor development, I'm not sure if using the word direct is would create problems in the future.
That's a pretty standard planning word. That's the only reason it's used.
And I'll take back my comment.
Okay. It's a good one though, as long as I understand what you're saying, but I guess it doesn't cause an issue. So does everybody agree that that we have our village area with those types of commercial uses and that we should focus industrial away from the village, probably along 896 as best we can? We currently have that light industrial just south on 896. There's one there. There's also one north of the village as well, but they're both on 896. So we're kind of doing that already. So we have to examine the current SU districts, including its current uses and locations. We talked about that a little bit. Do we want to add anything here about the historical house or just leave it back where it was? Janine, do you have any comments?
I was thinking about it.
Oh.
I think we should be good.
Okay.
where we are now. I think that's getting too into the weeds for this level.
Okay. The next one, to consider low density for hobby farms, to promote hobby farms. I think we all were in favor of that.
But hobby farms are how big? Like if you're talking about, like I know because I'm a small farm area, like 3 acres, and that's really not even enough for a hobby farm. So low density, I would say you need at least 5 acres to have a rooster, 3 acres to have 1 or 2 horses. So I don't understand that low density is a different zoning. You
We actually have an ordinance that regulates what you can have on your property as far as animals.
Right.
I just
and
want to
so-
jump in. The words low density zoning aren't referencing your LDR district. It's just a low density zoning term. It's not tied to a district. That's the first thing. Second of all, hobby farms are generally considered by farmers, and Dave and Kathy, please jump in, but there's certain parameters you have to meet in the state to be considered a farm, and you have to make so much money off your farm and, you know, really be making some money off your farm and earning some sort of a living off your farm, even if it's part of a living. So hobby farms would be something that doesn't meet that threshold.
But Janine, I think I'm speaking to the first point. When you say low LDZ, that's very close to LDR. So
Right, but it's not the same. It's just a general term for low density zoning. You
But I
just
agree
happen
with
to call
Barry.
it
I was
LDR.
confused. I was confused as well. Can we wordsmith that a little bit to come up with something different?
Thank you. I just want an acreage or something like that, something a little bit more like AR 5+ acres, which means you can have a rooster, you know, something like that. That's a little more specific. It's only a comment, but Nan thought it too. So.
Okay, I don't really know how to rephrase that because low density is like, that's what you call it. So you all would have to tell me what you think of as low density and what that number is.
Well, if you want a horse, it's 3 acres. If you want to have a rooster, it's 5. So I'll give you that data. And if you want to be a homestead, of course, you know, it's 10. So those are sort of the ideas there.
Nan, you're going to kill me, but I'd like to step back to B and change from business uses to something more appropriate about maybe retail or something like that, because we don't want this to force all the businesses. I don't want to move to Campbellsville.
Well, it doesn't say move, it just says focus.
Focus.
I know,
It's not
but
saying everybody has to move.
yes, but business is such a general term. We got a lot of professional uses and whatnot that fall into business. It even mentions not chains. So I think we're talking about retail, I think.
Well, we
We're
could do,
not, this is
no,
based on
you
the
do
survey
all-
results and the community meeting results. And people were, if you remember, we actually listed in both of those forms and even the interviews, people listed what they meant by small business, and they specifically said accountants, attorneys, architects, Chuck. So no, they also meant small scale office uses as well as personal service uses, maybe a nail salon, whatever. So I understand your point, but how would we phrase this so it?
I got it. So instead of focus, why don't we say expand? Small scale business uses, which doesn't mean focus, meaning that everything has to go there. Expand, meaning we don't have it now and we want more. Does that, Chuck, how does that feel?
I like it.
All right. Where were we?
We were on hobby farm.
Oh, low density. So why don't we say, instead of low density, why don't we swap it and say larger acreage zoning? Does that make something like that? You can make it prettier than that, but that's, rather than low density, say larger acreage, because Barry's talking about you need X, you know, you need 3 acres for 2 horses and you need blah, blah, blah. So that we're talking about the acreage has to be larger, not about the density. We're talking about the acreage, correct?
For a rooster.
Well, it's it's the same thing in the end, but we can change it to those words.
Okay. Does that, Barry, does that make you happy? Yes. All right.
But Nan, the whole recommendation to have a larger acre zoning, you know, that's a difficult.
Yeah, well, I'm not talking 10 and 20 acres. It says consider. I mean, and it says hobby farms. We're not talking about trying to, you know, take a large farm and force them into 10 or 20 acres. I'm opposed to that, as you know, very opposed to that.
I think a hobby farm, a good sized hobby farm is 5 acres. 3 acres is really pushing it to be too small.
What
zonings?
So maybe this is getting into how we do it, but if we can't rezone, then how do we encourage hobby farms?
Well, you can rezone. I think Nam was just saying that the comprehensive plan process isn't where you're rezoning.
No.
Oh, but
Could we say a new zoning district in appropriate areas?
no, because that's rezoning.
Well, I have a question. So why do we have to zone it? So if it's an AR, you know, and that's 2 acre zoning, it doesn't prohibit you from buying 5 acres and putting your hobby farm in there. So what's the matter with that?
Maybe we should just strike this recommendation?
Yeah.
Or we could say
I'm kind of thinking. Well, go ahead.
approaches to promote hobby farms.
Right, I agree
Yes.
with that.
Yeah,
If-
that's good. Yeah.
If there's
Jerry,
something
that's a
other
good
than
one.
What was that,
rezoning-
Jerry? You broke up for a second. I'm sorry.
Consider approaches to promote hobby farms. And then in the recommendations, you know, on the action items, we could expand on it.
Yeah, and we can leave it in appropriate areas because we don't want hobby farms. Well,
I agree. I agree with that.
yeah, leave it in appropriate areas, whatever that
Inappropriate.
means. To be determined. All right, that's good. Yeah, that works.
No, you got to get rid of the zoning.
Ah. It didn't want me to get rid of it.
So,
Yeah.
go ahead, Jerry. Is that
No,
Jerry?
I'm just gonna say, just leave it all in and Janine can fix it.
Yeah, fix it later. You know what we were saying.
Yeah, you can keep going.
Okay, so draft recommendation E, I'm sorry, it doesn't make much sense to me. Janine, can you explain to us what you meant, what that means?
Sure. That was a recommendation that came out of some of our community input where they were saying if any land development does happen going forward in the future, then do open space zoning, open space design zoning, so that large amounts of open space are still preserved through the development process.
Larger than what we require now.
I don't think they understood that we require that now.
Because we require that now. If you want to do cluster, you know, conventional, not conventional, and you do cluster, you are required to do open space. So I don't understand exactly.
I think they wanted large amounts, like 75%, 80% open space, which some municipalities do.
So we would have to change that ordinance. We would have to change that whole thing. So let's say that if are we in agreement that we want to, you know?
I mean, that's what this is saying through zoning and subdivision. Remember, there's going to be actions that explain what this means exactly.
Right.
So yeah, but yeah, if that's something you're not interested in, or you feel like what you're doing now is adequate, then we'll strike it. But there was interest in, I guess, taking it even further to preserve.
So instead of require, the word is increase. If we're going to go with that. Group, what do you think? Are we going to keep it or what?
You should keep it if it came from the feedback, but I agree with you about the increase because basically you're just considering increasing it from its current value.
Right, because we're already require it, so we're increasing from what it's required now.
So I would be willing to explore it, but I thought we were pretty much at the max right now.
Is there, tell me, I don't know, is there, so we couldn't change it because there's a requirement, a state requirement, a county requirement about how much you can ask somebody to put into a preserve?
No, there's no requirement.
No, I think it's what Mark felt would stand up in court.
Okay, so do we want to say, instead of enroll, say examine? We want to use a word like that about?
No, explore's fine.
Okay, all right, everybody's okay?
For this one, I would like to ask a question. If people don't, if our workshop respondents asked us to increase, it just reveals that, because I didn't know either that we were at our max or whatever. Can some of these, can we think about some of these recommendations being more of a, there's already a good rule on the book, or a satisfactory one, and then just raise awareness about the care that the township takes to help these things happen? I'm just stemming off of Jerry's suggestion for approaches to promote. Is this a promotion thing, like letting people know that we already are in good shape on this?
Well, Joan, I mean, so when a developer comes in and looks at a 100-acre parcel, they figure out whatever the zoning is. Hey, it's 2-acre zoning, and that's how many houses they can put in there. Stop me if I'm going down the wrong avenue, Joan, or Paul Overton. But if they do the cluster, then they cluster them, but they still do the same amount of houses. We're not dropping the amount of houses. We're just clustering them, and then we get open space. Is that correct, Joan?
Basically, yeah, because you're
Right.
So I think
if you do the cluster now, like there's some what we call open space developments, like White Clay Knoll, and you remember you were on the board when that came in, that those people had nice sized lots, but their building envelope was extremely small, and they could not put anything outside of that envelope. And if you recall, that up there, some people couldn't even put a deck outside their back door because it would have been outside the envelope. So that's part of that's open space design there, not necessarily clustering.
so. Maybe for this recommendation, then, do we want to put in some sort of, and I'm not saying what they are because I don't know, but to pursue some sort of incentives for developers to do larger open space and less houses by giving them some zoning or some bennies? Or we don't want to go down that road?
Well,
But some municipalities do, and I don't know, Joan, you can speak to this. I haven't investigated the ordinance yet in that level of detail, but some municipalities will have a multiplier such that you get a better yield in open space developments than you would in conventional developments. And then open space developments are also done by right. So you don't have the extra conditional use or special exception process, which takes more time and costs more money. And those are two financial incentives.
Would an example of that be, we're going to do cluster housing, but instead of 10 single family homes, we're going to allow you to do, 3-story condos. So you get 30 dwellings instead of 10 dwellings, but the same amount of open space around it. Is that what you're trying to describe? Or
it doesn't have to be that intensive. Even if you have a parcel and you're allowed to get 10 single family homes on it in conventional development, if somebody does cluster, then you allow them to have 13 homes instead. But those homes, instead of being on, and I'm just making up numbers right now, instead of being on 3-acre lots, each of those homes is on, let's say, a half-acre lot. You get 3 extra homes, and then you put your backup sewer system in the open space.
And the benefit is they've got a park around.
Like that.
Yeah. But these are all, I mean, there's a bunch of different options.
So I would rather have an incentive that would, like you were mentioning before. So if a developer comes in and wants to do the cluster, he or she could skip over some of the slowdowns and get the plan approved quicker. But he or she would have to drop the amount of houses they're doing. Because what you're telling me, Janine, that doesn't sound like it's good for the township to have more houses and you get to put your sewer in the open space. That's terrible.
I'm not saying that's not a be all end all. That was one example. You don't have
awful. That's a
lot
win for the developer, not for the residents of Franklin Township.
Not necessarily if it's a drainage field, right? We were trying to do that strategy.
See, that's a double use. That's a double use of the open space. It's the same thing like Paul and I have talked about years when the developers come in and they cluster. They say, here's your open space, and it's a swamp.
Yeah. No, she's exactly right. Like if you're doing a dual use, you can't grow trees in that drain field. You can't do ag in that drain field, and
some of them you can't play ball on it.
you can't do hardly anything. So I 100% support what Nan is saying, and I would even encourage that it shouldn't just be large amounts of open space. It could be large amounts of open space or agriculturally preserved area.
So I was talking about a specific incident with this Lexington Point, and where we're landing now is instead of doing that, instead of having 10 houses, we're going to have 36 houses, and Franklin Township is paying for sewer.
What?
Right?
Paying
That's
for
the
sewer?
Lexington Point solution, right? We're going to be, you know, those residents are going to be paying for a sewer solution. It's a different outcome, but it's not always rosy, right?
Well, Lexington Point failed. I mean, they haven't been able to put in their septic yet because they can't
No,
figure it out.
it's on its way. We just approved their plan.
You did finally?
Yeah. So they're on their way. Instead of 10 houses, we're going to get 36 houses and a sewer plant we're going to maintain.
Well, I think, okay, well, I think the recommendation, the way it's written now is we can talk about, you know, the action steps and how we would do it, but we're asking.
But the point is that it should be a strategy in place so that never has to happen again. Right?
Well,
That's
but
what we avoid.
Dave,
That
we
was a
put-
result of a lawsuit, though, however, was it not?
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
a curative amendment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Can we agree that E is good the way it is now? We can get into maybe how we would incentivize them to put more open space in there and possibly less houses?
Well, let's just move to the next one. That's a fit.
Okay, all right, let's F. So insert provisions to use site responsiveness and capacity of the land for the proposal as the baseline for all developments. I don't understand what that means. Sorry,
Don't apologize. I was going to ask what
it sounds like Chinese to me. So what does that mean?
So again, in public feedback, there was discussion about instead of starting with a blank slate of land and assuming the whole thing can be built upon, start with the baseline of saying this is land that has, and I'm just going to make this up right now, it has a grove of woodlands. It has some very good agricultural soils, and it has a historic farmhouse on it. So start with the requirement of saying that's the baseline. The baseline isn't this just as a clean slate. That's the baseline. Okay, with that as a given, what can we now do with this land given those resources and those opportunities?
I mean, you're talking about it being developed. So you mean you have to preserve the historical house, that you have to preserve the woods, and then you develop the good soils, or you farm the good soils as open space. What in your example, what exactly does that mean?
Well, we didn't, there wasn't a conclusion. The input was people asking if the township could take a site responsive resource-based approach as the given. To start out with, and saying resource X, Y, and Z are on the site. That's a given. We need to now take that into consideration if this property is developed. They're not throwaways effectively.
Okay, so we don't have to do it now, but can you rephrase that so I can understand it? Because, you know, so it says that, yeah.
I have a pretty big concern with that all those great resources go away before it gets brought in for development.
That's a possibility.
Yeah. So as soon as we start writing stuff in like that, things that would never have been lost will be lost.
Well, how about we put some incentives in there to keep them?
Yeah, we just can't make it something that where all of a sudden a piece of land.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Mrs. Developer buys it and says, I'm going to knock down the house and all this kind of stuff. And then look, it's all empty. It's fine. The woods are cut down and I'm all good.
Yes.
Yeah, we in fact had that happen in Kennett when I was on the planning commission. We had a requirement for identifying all the trees above a certain diameter. And one of the developers clear cut the land. Then he came in with his proposal.
Is that the Taco Bell?
No.
Because I remember when long before the Taco Bell was built, there were 4 300-year-old oak trees on that property. And when it went up for sale, shortly before that, they were all cut down. And then it took 4 or 5 years before anything actually happened. But
this was a property kind of off the road. And as you can imagine, that developer had a hard time getting his plans approved.
Mhm.
In
Okay.
that case, would these regulations though, if these regulations weren't on the books, would that person have likely done that no matter? I mean, is it the
Well-
regulations that influence that, or
Well, we
No,
just
have,
asking a question?
Not necessarily. Aesthetically, you might want to save some of the trees. Like you might want to save some of those very old oaks.
we have some requirements that would prevent some of that. Like you can't demolish a house, whether it's historic or not, without getting a permit, right? So the person would have to come in for a permit. They can't just knock it down and then come in.
And
Mhm.
most municipalities have woodlands protection ordinances, so you can't just
Yeah, we do have
clear cut a property.
Yeah.
a timber harvesting requirement that if you're going to cut down a bunch of trees, then you have to have a harvesting plan. So you'd have to show us that.
But I think we had a situation where somebody did like cut down the trees and then came in later and, you know, what do you do? And they're like, oh, they're gone, you know,
Yeah, we had someone knock down a house too and then come in later. It happens.
say they're gone. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it does happen. So I mean, I think that we're using the word incentives. It could be interesting to investigate what those incentives might be in a lot of situations to, you know, have developers do what we want rather than try to regulate. Because if you regulate, we're right, they're going to try to do it ahead of time.
So then F, is this something, I've heard different viewpoints on this, and I'm not sure I have a clear path forward. Is F something that's interested in keeping in as a recommendation or not? Rephrasing or not, I mean, just the concept.
Why don't you take rephrase it and we can take a look at it when it comes back in the chapter and see
Yeah,
whether it works or not.
We do have a baseline. I don't understand what it means, site responsiveness, but we do have a baseline of like the developer can't consider the steep slopes and wetlands as part of the developable acreage, right?
Mhm.
So we do some of that. I don't know what other site responsiveness items there are. You said historic properties and woodlands, but I don't know. So there is some baseline setting. And I don't remember what they all are.
We'll put a question mark next to it.
Okay, well, let's move on. So G talks about a buffer zone to reduce conflicts between agricultural uses and residential developments. Talks about organizing information on township website and social media geared to emphasizing what a rural community living is, not what and what agriculture is. I mean, I'm fine with that. I mean, Joan, do you get very many calls about people who are complaining about agriculture?
No, not normally.
I think they just, you know, Dave's in the line, they flip him the bird when he's running his tractor down the road. But I think most people are patient with the tractors and stuff. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think most people are now used to people like the Amish when they spread manure. I mean, people are used to that. I mean, that's what happens.
Well, I mean, lot of farmers spread manure, so it's just,
Well, they're by me. That's why I said it.
yeah.
And I feel like if you're living here, it's kind of part, I mean, I don't want to say part of the charm because it sounds like it's a, you know, but it is part of living out here, right? We sort of like having the Amish and like having the farmers, and it's just, that's part of living out here. You know, if you decide to live out here and don't like any of that, you probably didn't do your research when you moved.
But,
Well, that's what I would call royal character.
Right.
Should we delete this then?
No, but
Since it's a non-issue?
This person is saying, is there any way that we can help with that to help Dave drive his tractor down the road? Like maybe we put up signs that say tractors have right of way, or, you know, I don't know,
Right.
tractor crossing, something like that.
Yeah, I
Clear
think
the
we should
road.
leave it in, but maybe wordsmith it a little bit to, you know, to say, be aware that agriculture's here and,
Yeah.
you know, take care of your tractors and don't like go 100 miles an hour and try to veer around them. And
That's a good point. We have the Amish signs, but you know, there's plenty of times where I've seen those you know, I've probably hit Dave's tractor, I don't know. But we've got this, you know, maybe we have a tractor sign or something put up.
Is Dave still on the line? I want to hear if he's
Okay,
got
there.
any input. Can you unmute, Dave?
Dave, maybe unmute. I'll speak until he comes up. Like the noise ordinance is kind of a generic noise ordinance, but animals, for example, you know, we do need to consider the ordinances from an agricultural perspective. So it's more than just signs. It might actually be, okay, how do you make sure that you have no noise ordinances, whether it's the air guns that are used to protect the grapes, which should be allowed, or noise ordinances that prevent too many of the cows from being disturbed, like the Black Angus. It affects.
We don't have a noise ordinance.
No, we don't have it. And the ag, if you're in the ag security area, you can run your tractors all night and you're not allowed to complain. It's fine. It's part of agriculture.
So I want to help Dave to unmute. If you move your mouse to the bottom left of your screen, the unmute button will pop up.
There's a microphone with a red slash through it, Dave.
But it's
Alan
not
can
always,
unmute him.
oh,
He's
you
the
unmute.
host.
See him.
There
Well,
you
he's
go.
there.
Well, I'm not saying he's not there. Wait a minute. Let me do this. Dave. There he is. Okay.
Can you unmute him?
I just tried. It didn't work.
Oh,
Wait a minute. Let me try
Oh,
again.
There it is.
He's off. Dave.
Shows that he's muted.
Am I on?
yeah.
on.
Yay.
Oh, okay.
Hey.
Welcome.
I can farm, but I'm not good on the computer, so bear with me.
You're doing great.
I like I say, try and get up and down the roads. That is a hassle sometimes.
But is there anything we could do to make your life easier, whether it's the roads or people complaining or you know, what makes your life hard that the township could assist with? That's what this person's trying to get at.
We pretty much just deal with it as we go. If we're exceptionally wide, we run an escort. We found that works best for us. That does help slow some people down. If not, they get woke up real quick. So.
But is there anything we can do from a town to educate people? You think that they'll still act the way they act? It doesn't matter.
Really, most people don't pay any attention until they really see you in front of them. You can put the little signs up. It looks like a farmer on a tractor, but most people don't read the signs anyway.
You could enforce the tree cutting part and make it, you know, make the owner responsible for cutting their trees, which is correct. And that would help.
Well, it's the trees are a big problem for us. It's not just the township roads, it's state roads. We run several township, multiple states. We're all over the place. Tomorrow we'll even get a bigger chance at it if we get to plowing snow. As the trees get heavy with snow, they hang down even further in the roads. And that creates problems, you know.
So what I'm saying, the township could enforce the tree trimming over the road surface, which is a private individual responsibility. Those are privately owned trees.
We do that. We trim the trees.
You're getting a lot of them done, but if you ever sat in a combine and had to navigate down these roads, and people do stop for you, lots of times will pull off the road, or they pull alongside of a telephone pole which you can't get past anyway. So it's challenging. But
Is there
yeah.
anything specifically, Dave, that the township could do in the near term, in the next, let's say, 1 to 5 years, that would help significantly remediate some of those issues?
Like I say, it could put some signs up, let people be aware that there is farming in the area. And the same with the Amish. They're not on the road a lot, but when you come up on a buggy, usually on Sundays, it'll wake you up, or you better be awake. So a little bit of signage maybe.
I think we should do signage, and I think we should put something at least on the website that, you know, that somehow addresses the fact that we have rural character, and with rural character comes tractors on the road, other farm equipment, you know, it might slow you down, buggies on the road, that sort of thing. Just
Odors.
excuse me,
Odors.
odors, yes. Odors
How
is
about
rural
in-
character.
An article in the newsletter.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good idea.
That would hit a lot of people, yeah.
Yeah, I think that periodically we should do that. That's a good idea.
We don't do much on odor anymore. I'm sure 18 years ago when we had 300 head of cattle at Chesterville, it'd take your breath away sometimes. But we're out of that for right now, so.
You
Right.
get used to it.
Yeah, you
got
do get
used to
used to it.
Yeah,
Like,
we
I
didn't
like it.
smell it. Anybody that
Good.
visited us would smell it, but
Yeah.
honestly, the cows, not a big
Well,
deal.
yeah, there's certain days when I
I'm
smell it.
sure Heather Hills, you're right there in Heather Hills,
Yeah.
aren't you, Chuck?
Yeah,
You could probably smell it there in the valley some, but
not much. Yeah, but nothing
Yeah.
like what you get in West Grove
Mhm.
some days. But
Okay.
I like
Well-
the idea of the signs, and maybe where our township signs are, we could think about augmenting them. And as people come in and out of our township, we could put a little message that, we're promoting ag. And so,
Yeah. We promote our rural character, which means,
exactly.
yeah, I think that's a good idea.
And that
You
even
make,
reminds,
if
that
you
would
could make
remind the
multiple-
residents as they come and go.
Dave, I'd like to make a comment. I've lived out here, I don't know, 32, 33 years. And way back then, you'd wake up in the morning, I'd be taking the kids out to get them to school, and the odor of the mushroom houses. And I would say to my children, "What does that smell like?" And they said, "That smells like money, Mom." I said, "There you go. That's where you live."
Yep.
And that's where we lived, and that's what is important out here. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, Mary, did you hear the recommendation to put some in newsletters to wake up the residents?
Oh, yes. Oh,
Okay.
I have my clipboard. It's on it.
Okay, let's try to keep going. I'm still trying to get some time at the end of the meeting. So we're on to H. Review the zoning to reduce non-conformities. I have no problem with that. Or review land uses or review procedure aspects of zoning to ensure they are current. So I have a question for us. When we have all these things, it says review zoning, review land uses, review. Who reviews it? I'm just curious. I know it's an action step. Is it the PC or are we hiring a consultant?
Usually what happens in municipalities I've worked with is the planning commission, and in this case, the historical commission, would take a first shot at looking at it. You sort of check off some obvious items. The comprehensive plan could identify some, issues. Then both of those entities would take the comp plan recommendations, take it a step further, and start doing an examination over time. And then once it got to the point where you had enough changes you wanted to make that were all together in one batch, then you would hire a consultant.
So I have
changes for you.
I have a question. Seeing we're trying desperately to get through all the material. When is the comp plan? The task force is going to review zoning?
Say that again?
Like you said, the comp plan could review it. What does that mean? We're going to start reviewing zoning. We're having trouble getting through all this material to try to get the plan out.
No, that would be when the chapters are actually drafted. That would be me.
Oh, you, okay.
Yours truly. You'd be looking at the zoning to figure out if there's any recommendations that could be, fine-tuned here.
Okay, all right, got it.
And there might be some of these recommendations that disappear when we actually draft the chapters. Some of them might be like, there's not really anything here.
Got it.
These are recommendations to start with. Then if we get to review land uses and zoning to ensure they meet the MPC requirements, and we take a look and be like, yeah, the township's in good shape, then that recommendation would just be, dropped.
Okay. Let's move on to 2. Support revitalization of existing buildings on already developed sites. The first recommendation is incentives for redevelopment of existing sites rather than encourage development of open lands and green fields. This includes compatible additions onto existing buildings to facilitate their continued use. I'm sorry, I don't understand this one. So incentives, go ahead.
They're saying encourage the reuse and redevelopment of brownfields, existing buildings, rather than just go greenfield every time. And the way to do that is to maybe let them adapt some things or add on additions where maybe it's not allowed normally. So for example, in my house, our very first zoning officer said I wasn't allowed to build an addition because I was on a steep slope. I was like, well, that's crazy. I live in the house. I need to have an addition to make it livable. So it's the difficulties you go through to update an existing structure.
Okay, I understand that. So, Janine, when you go back, can you dumb it down so somebody like me could understand it? Because I didn't understand the way it was written. So, you know, the regular person could. Does that make sense?
I like what Paul said about brown fields versus green fields, and that's kind of the right language too, I think. Okay.
She can take a look at that. We don't have to do it now.
Brown fields are the one Dave spreads manure on.
The ones that are next door to me.
But then they turn green. Look at that.
They turn really green. Yeah. Okay. Coordinate with the business community on developing a working group to focus on redevelopment and reuse as an alternative to tear downs and open land development. Establish an administrative policy on Franklin's revitalization of existing buildings as a starting point for development discussion. So isn't A and B kind of the same? Or does A and B look kind of the same, that we could make it one recommendation?
Well, B was more, and this also came in out of the interviews with some of the businesses. There apparently was an effort, which I forget the name of now, businesses several years back where they started to get together to try to coordinate how to help the business community in the township. And so some of this also was of interest to the businesses in how do we encourage redevelopment and reuse of existing buildings. And this may not be, this first recommendation really just focuses on regulations, where it says incentives in land development and zoning, basically zoning and subdivision ordinance. This really focuses more on a working group to how to make that reuse and happen more often than tear downs happen.
Joan, do we have a lot of tear downs? Do we have tear downs, Joan?
No, not a lot, no.
Okay, so this is a future goal in case, you know, things happen. Usually tear downs happen when land becomes expensive and used up. So people tear it down to reuse it.
No, there's one in the village that's going to be torn down, right?
No, it's not. Wash your mouth out with soap.
This is also appropriate, for example, when the golf course, there is a clubhouse which needs to be reused. And from my understanding from the owner, there's a lot of pushback from the township on trying to get that redesignated.
Good example.
I mean, I don't know if there was. They haven't been in since their original one. I think everybody was interested in it.
Okay, well, that's an example of a repurposing of a building that's on, so that's not a tear down, but it could be if they don't repurpose it correctly. So it's still a useful draft recommendation that's relevant even today.
Well, I'm just curious. Dave and Mary, is there
pushback
on?
No, absolutely not. It's a non-issue right now. The person who bought Chisel Creek is totally engaged in building his family home, and that item, especially because of coronavirus and how it's affected the restaurant industry, it's been pushed off the table entirely. It will be revisited down the road. There's been no yes or no pushback, no non-pushback. It's like a non-issue right now.
Well, they were kind of disappointed. Yeah, they were disappointed because they wanted to do a brew pub, but they kind of put that on hold real quick.
Well, they had to because the investors that he had who wanted to invest in a restaurant in March of 2020, nobody. So he said, I'm not even going to talk about that. I want to build my family home.
Okay,
I just really where it is right now. And
okay, I just wanted to pick that up. So,
it might come up, and and we'll deal with it then. But no, we're not pushing back. We're not promoting it. We're not promoting it. It's just not an issue right now.
So, Mary, in your opinion, then those recommendations of A and B of reusing, existing structures like the clubhouse is a good thing to have in the comp plan.
Absolutely,
okay.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on.
I would like to comment that it is a very small number of buildings because we addressed this already with historic. So I get it from a historic standpoint, but we're literally talking about buildings that are built in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that we're talking about, and how many of them are substantial enough to be overly concerned.
Well, some of this also, and this came out in the interviews, And also what we talked about a little bit with energy conservation, some of this was about not having additional materials go into landfills and
Yeah,
really trying to
environmental.
build on what the township already has from that perspective as well.
But it's also reusing of spaces that are already built on rather than using up more farm fields.
That's exactly also, yes.
I think it's okay to leave it in. I understand, Chuck, your point, but I think we should leave it in. It's, you know.
Yeah, but I agree with Chuck. I would not, if someone wanted to tear down a metal skin building built in 1999, I don't really care. You know, but it's from an environmental perspective, we can reuse it. That would be good.
So you want to define what we want to reuse and
No,
versus
not
what we
here.
don't?
Not here.
Okay. So leave it, guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
And also some of this came right from the business community. This working group focusing on redevelopment and reuse. That seemed to be of interest to the business community. So,
Okay.
so
Can
can we
move
leave it
on?
alone then or not?
I think we decided to leave it in, correct?
Okay, moving on to 3.
Consider existing businesses, both in-home and in commercial buildings, and how they can be supported. Review again zoning, how it permits home occupations. That's a good thing. Particularly relevant as home occupations may become more prevalent and here to stay post-pandemic. Zoning should be made to provide greater capacity for home occupations through type of home occupations will still need to be weighed within consideration for location, scale, density, and housing. I like the fact, I personally, I really like the fact about home occupations, and to review how to permit home occupations, meaning make it easier rather than harder. When you say weighed within consideration for location, scale, and density of housing, what do you mean? That some home occupations aren't appropriate when the housing is dense? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, certain municipalities will say that you can't have a home occupation that's an intensive home occupation. Let's say if you're in an apartment where you're going to be getting deliveries and whatnot. So maybe you can run, you know, if you sit on a computer screen all day, then you can do what's called, for lack of a better term, it's called a minor home occupation. But if you're going to do a major home occupation where maybe you're making widgets out of your apartment and you're receiving 2 or 3 UPS deliveries a day and you're having clients come in, then maybe at that point, that's not the appropriate type of housing for you to be, or situation for you to be doing that in.
I don't know. I personally don't feel that we should have to regulate that sort of thing and kind of become the home occupation police.
No, but it is a regulation for residential neighborhoods because it also, you have to look at if customers are visiting, you have to look at parking availability, then you have to look at fire safety. Is there proper evacuation routes and handicapped access and all that?
Right.
So
if I could comment, when I was doing my flower business, I would go to my brides. They would not come to me. I would go to them, get the order, make the order in here at my house. Occasionally, a bride would come to me. I can't tell you how many times they knocked down my mailbox, but in any case, but my neighbors do not want strange cars coming in and out of my circle. And I agree with that. So there is an issue. You can't have a lot of strange cars and people coming into your housing development.
That would be major versus minor, what Mary just described.
Yeah.
Minor is Mary's in her house doing her thing and then goes out to visit clients. Major would be when all the clients start to appear at Mary's house.
Yeah.
So what
knock
happens?
My mailbox over.
So what happens? What if somebody wanted to have a Pilates studio in their basement? That would be.
Well, I think, Nan, what we have currently is there's like an amount, like so many visitors per day.
Right.
And I really can't remember. Joan can probably straighten this out.
Well, it has to be a low impact business, you know.
Yeah, and so maybe we define that. It's like
I can look and see.
I'm just guessing 6 visitors a day or something. I don't know, or maybe it's a week.
So somebody who lives in cluster housing and has a Pilates business can only have a certain amount of people, but wait a minute. But if I had one, then I could have as many people as I wanted, right?
Well, so I guess it would be an individual review. Do you have adequate parking? And does your Pilates studio hold 2 people or 22 people? right? Because then it's fire safety and bathrooms and does your
Okay,
septic
right.
handle
I
it?
get that part.
Yeah, so
But I
that's,
was talking about the amount of people. So, but if I had one Pilates studio, right, but then I did 10 people a day, I could do that. But somebody in denser housing could not do that, is what we're saying, correct? Or
You're
they
going
could.
into what we're calling here, Nan, a secondary accessory use.
Okay.
They're starting to run a Pilates studio. Now we're starting to weigh into more of a straight up commercial use.
yeah.
And so now you're starting to cross over between a home occupation, which is a more low intensity use, no matter if it's a major or minor. And now you're really starting to get into a whole nother secondary use of the property versus your primary residence that maybe you're working out of.
Okay.
Now it's your primary residence where you're really running a secondary, commercial business out of.
Okay. All right. I'm getting into like small stuff. I agree. So let's leave
So
the
I
recommendation and to review it.
Can we
Is what-
say it's a good recommendation, though? We want to encourage home businesses and we
Yes.
want to make them easy to get and not bother them with permits and signage. And we have to review all that to make it easy for them.
That's a good point. So can we use the word encourage somewhere in here that we're trying to encourage, but not, not burden the people that live around the people
Yeah.
doing the home occupation? Janine, so you can just make a note to use the word encourage somewhere.
Well, maybe say encourage, what did you call it, Janine? Minor or something?
Yeah, right now the municipality planning code requires you to have minor home occupations for residential uses, period. That's it. When we had all of our discussions, and a couple people even in this group talked a lot about home occupations and whether they should be changed a bit to allow them to be a little bit more flexible. So that's the part where this recommendation comes from. So that's why it says should be made to provide, review zoning, that sort of thing. Those words came pretty much right out of this group.
We do have that in our zoning. Like if, for example, if you have a low impact business, which means you only have one visitor per week, that's exempt. You don't have to do anything to be able to do that. And then the other, when you have to apply for a home occupation permit, you can have up to 12 visitors per day. And as long as you have adequate parking for them. And that's when you apply for it. So I mean, that's, you could do a Pilates studio that, if you only had one class, I guess, but.
One person private. Okay.
I think this is fair. All you're saying is the draft recommendation is to review the zoning. And I think that's appropriate given COVID. And I think we could probably, my suggestion is move on because we should review it to increase it if we could, but we have zoning in place. So
Yeah.
I'm good.
I think we definitely need to increase it, but I think we can talk about it later.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to 4. Last one. Yay. Plan for housing needs while protecting township traditional, rural, historic, natural, and scenic qualities. Okay, so the variety we've talked about, I don't think anybody has a problem with that. Additional housing through mixed use in and near Campbellsville. I don't, any problems with either of those, A or B. C, consider focusing any other additional multifamily housing near current apartments. Use Wagner Apartments / Heritage Village. We had talked about there's some land up there where we could talk about maybe that would be a good place for multifamily housing, but we're not changing zoning. We're just talking about it. Examine accessory dwelling unit zoning regulations to ensure they provide for added variety of housing for aging in place and a rural housing alternative. I think we agree with that. And Chuck, I think you're going to talk a little more about that as soon as we're finished, correct?
I think it's already in place, so I'm not sure if we need to examine it.
Okay. Tiny homes. What do people feel about E, 4E?
I think this is a dangerous area. That's the only reason I asked about it because, I think the ADU is good as it stands right now, but I could easily see how even on my 3 acres, I'm like, set up a different electrical service, a separate drive, even a separate septic if I wanted. And now you're kind of on an R2 sort of situation. So that was my concern. That's why I was kind of probing that because we really don't want to have two residences on one plot. I mean,
Well, I don't know that everyone agrees with that. That came out of the review of the ADU, and there were quite a number of people that felt that they had the right to put a caretaker home on their property.
I'm talking about a separate residence that becomes a permanent rental turnover, not a family, multi-generational family situation you were addressing, Chuck, but I'm just going to set up a way to make money by putting additional like housing up.
I think what might happen is, you put that additional house for mom, right? And then mom passes away, and then it becomes, a rental, or it becomes something like that.
This is the exact same conversation that happened. I'm just reporting to you what happened in the planning, at the planning board. And there was a lot of interest in having the ability to, on the larger pieces of land, having the ability to have a separate detached additional dwelling unit. And that's why it was passed the way it was passed.
But if they
I actually think it's a good idea, to tell you the truth. I didn't mean to say that I didn't.
Well, but if they
And I'm
want to
just
do it
saying
for-
that there was interest.
If they want to do it for a separate family, I'm fine with that. It's called a minor subdivision. That I don't think two families with different names and such should be permitted to be on one parcel under one zoning R1.
The first and biggest hurdle that we ran into is the definition of family.
Yep.
Biggest hurdle. No one wanted to redefine the term family. No one wanted to touch the term single family. No one wanted to do anything with that, with family, because legally it's so difficult.
When I looked at this, I didn't understand how tiny homes fit in terms of acreage or I didn't know why tiny homes were in there.
To me, it's no different than a mobile home or a
Yeah,
trailer.
that was my comment is, I mean, the tiny home is basically a new hip way of making a mobile home.
Yeah.
So I think it just kind of gets pushed under HDR, or I mean, if someone owns 3 acres of land, do we care if they put a tiny home on it? I don't know.
No, but it's what Barry said. What if they want a tiny home trailer park behind his
Right.
3
You can't.
I think we should just delete this recommendation and let it
Yeah.
fall under aging in place, because certainly under the ADU ordinance right now, when you can add an additional building, the additional building could technically be a tiny home, or it could be a mobile home, or it could be a garage with an apartment over it.
Yeah, and I think the major concern with the additional building is the intent is, an in-law suite or whatever they call them, for an additional family member. And the concern is not that, is this a backdoor way to subdivide your property?
Right.
Perfect.
Right.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
Yes.
so you want to avoid that.
So, but one of
And
the
the
things
thing
to
is, it
keep
will
in
have to
mind,
be, you have to enforce it. That's the only
Yeah.
way to deal with that.
one of the things to keep in mind, because I sat in on all those wonderful discussions with Chuck, is that what is going to be the limiting factor here is going to be septic under the way things are currently defined. And when you start to look at simply the number of lots that actually permit this kind of development within the township, you're really not looking at a lot of lots. You're really not on the scale that Barry is talking about. You've got to, if you're going to adhere to the zoning and other things, you start pushing it up. It becomes very difficult. It looks like a problem. It realistically is probably not a problem.
How many have happened since the ordinance was passed?
I think it's a goose egg.
0.
There's one that happened in advance that could not avail itself of the ordinance.
And the way your zoning is written, you need, if you have 3.5 acres or less, the additional living unit has to be within the principal dwelling, or attached to the principal dwelling. It's when you have 3.5 to 10 acres, you can have a separate dwelling.
I guess what I'm saying is this, like Joan said, the current ADU is adequate, and I don't want to kind of like continue to expand that because I think they did a good job with the current ADU. So I that's striking it and moving on.
Yeah. So the last one is agricultural worker housing needed to be addressed. I don't know. Anybody have thoughts on that?
I think this was a problem that Dave Hoffman ran into for some reason. I don't know, with respect to the vineyard. For some reason that sticks in my mind, but I couldn't tell you anything more than that.
He's more seasonal workers, something like that.
I think so, but I'm not, to be honest, I'm not really sure. He, I do remember him talking about it, and I don't even remember if he talked about it in the community meetings or where I heard him talk about it, but I did hear him talk about it at some point.
I don't think it's something that we need as a draft recommendation, do we? I think we can strike that. Okay, we're finished. Yay. All right, Chuck, talk fast.
I'm up.
Yeah, I went as fast as I could.
Okay, so I marked up the priority subject trail and other pedestrian circulation connections, and I sent it out to everybody. Janine, do you have a copy of that?
Do you want to share your screen by chance?
I could. I don't know how.
Go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, the green button that says share screen.
Okay.
And then share your screen.
Oh, you have to have it open though.
Am I there?
Yes.
So we were talking, the way it currently was set up, it was talking a lot about driving to a location and walking around that location. I firmly believe, especially after COVID, but seeing people walking along the roads and diving into the ditches and all that stuff, that we've matured enough that we need to give the roads back to people that are walking and riding and etc. So I wanted to spend more resources on developing paths and improving roads to include all means of transportation, not just the car, to develop a plan for the township to accomplish this in the next 10 years, where we're walking along the sides of our minor roads. Development roads, obviously, they work perfectly well to walk within. But walking along our roads to get to destinations, whether it's your neighbor's house, whether it's Campbellsville, whether it's the park, any of those things. And I think that all can be accomplished in the right-of-ways that we currently have. We just need to have a plan. Comments, questions?
Yeah, that's why I commented with you and I encourage that. I think this last mile of letting everyone be able to get out habitually to an area to just enjoy the outside is very important. I don't necessarily think it's important, we've tried it, to walk all the way down to 896 to go to our car service for K&T or whatever. But yeah, that habitual, everyday, get out in nature, last mile problem is something I think we can accomplish.
Are there any other comments?
I mean, I think probably this group is in violent agreement, because I think one of the things that we really stressed was being, having a logical connected trail plan, having what, one of the comments that I heard was the interesting thing about Franklin Township is you have to drive to take a walk. And You know, so if you're gonna have, so if you go outside, because if you want to walk on a path that's not on the road, if you want to walk on the road, you can walk out your front door. If you want to walk on a path, you got to go find a path. And so people were, and I said, yeah, that is true. I mean, my neighborhood doesn't have a sidewalk. You know, 896 isn't that walkable. So I think it's a long way to say I'm in agreement with this. I think it should be a focus.
The other thing is, I made a mention that the highly developed areas are the ones that need the most attention, because not to put too fine a point on it, but Nan doesn't need more walking opportunities. She can go back and forth her property once and get enough exercise for all of us. But the HDR or whatever, higher density, they do need a way to get to a park to get out. And so they're the ones that are the most sensitive to this availability.
But Nan is a good example. She really literally can't walk anywhere off her own property. She can't walk down.
No, I can. I can get into the state land to go walk out the corner of my property and go right into Strawbridge.
Okay.
And then I can go to Fair Hill.
I'm not worried about the ag zone people who own 5 acres or 4 acres or 10 acres. They have an ability to get outside and enjoy nature. I'm worried about the people who are in an apartment, that they have access to those recreational abilities. That would be my only caveat or additional point.
Yeah,
to you.
I mean, just to echo or amplify Barry's point, if you're living in the apartments right there on Gypsy Hill Road, where are you going to go take a walk if you're going to have to walk around the roads, right? You got to go right onto Gypsy Hill, then you're on 896, and then you can get to a park, but there really isn't a whole cohesive area for people to go out and walk. But I think we're all in agreement. This is something that we need to focus on.
I am in total agreement, and I like the idea of finding paths and that sort of thing. I grew up in Delaware County in a conventional developed area and stuff, but we had paths that weren't like done by the township, but we all had paths to get ways to go for walks. I mean, that's what we did. But
maybe I would add, like, I'm still in the mood that Janine is like, okay, how do we modify this? But I'm like, well, let's add the special interest or focus on highly developed or higher density housing areas. Would be my only comment.
Should I give up my screen, Janine?
You can. I don't know if you have anything else you want to share on your screen, or.
This is my big thing now.
Okay. Yeah, you can give up your screen.
So Chuck, are you feeling satisfied with the response?
Yeah, what's our next, are we going to modify this section to kind of reference what I've shown here? Is that what?
I think what you've shown, Chuck, is really getting into the next part of what we're doing, where we start to talk about actions. We have general recommendations to talk about how to enhance pedestrian movement. And some of these recommendations, are good, but some of them are much more specific. Like, this can be accomplished using existing roads, et cetera. That's where you're getting into the action items.
so Janine, what you're saying is you're going to use them. You're just going to use them in a different way.
Yeah, they'll be used in a different way. They'll appear differently. They'll appear more these are more detailed, I would say.
So it will be in the plan, just so Chuck knows that it's a good
just in a
idea.
different-
And it will be
it'll
handled
look
that way. Yeah. Because I think it's hard when we go through the planning process about what's the big picture and then what are the action steps, because everybody likes the action steps because the big picture is kind of boring.
Right, exactly.
But we got to do the big picture first. And these are great. I think this is great. And Janine will use them when she writes the chapters, and you'll see them there. And
Right.
we can talk about it again.
My concern kind of is that these we're talking about not necessarily the same items. This, I just moved everything out to show what was there. So this was more about gaining access to the parkland to walk. And I think it's really important to indicate that we want to develop something at our front doors as opposed to at the parklands, or to connect the two.
Well, we left it generalized enough Chuck, where we were just saying pedestrian walkway network that links destinations. We didn't define the destinations yet, and that's what you're starting to do now.
Okay.
Do you see what I'm saying? The draft recommendation just says destinations. Now you're actually, through the actions, you're starting to get into what that means of destinations. And I think that's great.
Okay.
But it's almost more of an implementation of what the destinations means. And people could have specific destinations. Somebody might say preserve, somebody might say every residential development, somebody might say 1723. You know, there might be destinations that are specifically called out as first tier, and then there might be second tier destinations as well.
But the big picture, though, which is important, this is, I know sometimes maybe it seems like weeds, but I would hate for nice sidewalks and nice road improvements to happen. And then 3 years down the road, they say, hey, let's rip them all up in Campbellsville and put in sewer. So I'd like to see some coordination and progression of steps. Like, how are we going to address all these issues in a coordinated big picture fashion? Because nobody likes to see that happen, that waste.
But I'd also like to say is that we need to define when we get into the weeds about what our walkways are. I mean, Chuck was big and speaking about this. Sidewalks are not really what we need here in our rural character township. I'm talking about pathways and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But that's the weeds, not the big picture.
Yeah, I agree with you, Nan, completely. So I have a colleague who lives in Oxfordshire, which is Oxford County in the UK. And I lived with him for a month and we walked absolutely everywhere. I think I got in the car once. And we walked the kids to school and we walked to the pub in the next village. And I always thought, like, I love that. And it was all paths. There was not one sidewalk that we walked on that I can remember. It was all ambling through fields and cutting back through this path, well established, people took care of it. So I know, you know, there's a lot of differences, but this thing has happened. I'm just trying to think of anywhere locally, aside from living in a more developed area where those, you know, those paths happen out here. If there's another model that similar to point to or recall something like that is.
Kathy, you reminded me, that's the UK though. The UK is like that. I remember walking to school. There are just these random pathways that were just accepted and that's the way you got to school.
You're even like little bridges that you know, that somebody laid a couple of boards down. And, you know, I just
on the way to go to school.
Yeah, well, and we walked to the pub. I mean, we went to the pub 3 times a week for lunch. You know, that was like a hearty 2-mile walk each way. It was awesome, and very matter of fact, and people took care of it. I mean, I don't know from a litigious thing. I'll just say it. So we have told the people who live back on Forest Gump Road that if they wanted to walk from their development over to the winery, we pointed out a path through the woods, a number of them, and said, you don't drive, just here, you could walk straight through here. Love for you to do that. And nobody took us up on it.
Oh.
And it took some convincing for ourselves from a legal standpoint to get comfortable with it. You know, so I think there are people that talk about this, how to walk around without having a lot of infrastructure. But I worry about legal things because we're a property that you could walk from Good Hope Road all the way down to the village very safely. You don't even have to touch 896 except for once. You can walk a good long way, in fact.
Well, the way to get around that is you could do a trail easement, but because you already have an agricultural easement, I'm not sure that you can do that. Because if you do a trail easement, it's dedicated, then you're off the hook. Just so you know
have to do that first, the trail easement usually.
I think you do. I think
too, what Kathy's speaking to, it just reminds me of people that I've talked to that have lived in Chester County for decades and decades, would say, for example, they could ride their horse from their property, 10 or 15 miles away and ride to the hardware store or the local, restaurant and ride back. And it was all through handshake agreements where you could just ride through private property or bicycle through private property, to get where your destination is. So, and that was happening in rural areas, all throughout Chester County. But I think as more and more people started to come into the community, and then also, just as you were saying, insurance, litigious people, that sort of thing. I think some of those rural ways started not happening anymore for those types of reasons. But I do think there's a history of in Chester County of that very thing happening in these, these types of rural communities, rural situations.
But I have to believe that there's some way the township could get an insurance policy to, indemnify those people that wanted to have a path through their property without an easement.
Oh, I'm sure there is.
As far as insurance, it would be relatively inexpensive because, it just, I would think, because I would think that the amount of people getting hurt on a trail is probably low. So we could look into that as a township to indemnify those people who are willing to let people walk on a path through their property that doesn't have a trail easement for whatever reason.
On a related but somewhat different subject. So if I don't know how many people are familiar with the bottom of Heather Hills when it comes on to Chesterville Road. If you look to the left, you can't see anything. We have an accident about once every 6 months because people coming down the road can't see, and if it's awkward. Why? And it's not just here. It happens all the time. Why can't that portion of the side of the road be corrected? Because it doesn't seem like we do. Is there a reason why it's not corrected, or is it just that it's not standard procedure?
It's a state road.
Yeah. Okay, so let's I can't think of but I know that there are definitely places that are. Okay, so if it is a state road, it's off the side of the state purview. Why can't the township take care of that? Because that's what we're going to start to talk about to get the paths to be safe.
So
in order for the paths
I'm sorry, the township can take the road over.
No, I don't mean to take the road over. I mean to create the path that's alongside the road.
Mary.
That's not our right of way. And then you're on private property.
So Chuck, but you can work with PennDOT to get a right of way to get a trail or a path put in. But as far as maintaining the road and the bushes or cutting the bank back, that would have to be PennDOT. That's in their right of way.
So I have a question. Why can't we work with Chester County and PennDOT to try to make all of these areas like 896, 841? There's other townships that are also trying to get this done, and see if we can't get some sort of money towards getting trails along these roads, not just for us, but work with John Lawrence and with Dinneman's gone, so it's committed, I guess, right?
Right. That's where the action is, I think, Nan. We have to get involved with our legislators, and that's how everything will happen. And when you're talking about paths and how can we do them and are they safe, I just want to say I grew up in North Philadelphia. We didn't have paths. We had alleys, and the alleys went behind everybody's house, and somehow we worked it out. It can be worked out. Whether it be a path, an alley, we can do this.
So I agree.
Have a problem.
So John Lawrence would be a good place to start. He does transportation. He's big on that. When I had a meeting with him about other things, he was talking about that.
Right.
But he likes Republicans. So all you Republicans, you need to go talk to him.
I agree.
So you should organize yourselves if you're Republicans. He talks to Democrats. I'm one. He doesn't talk to me much, but really.
I agree, Nan. I've been trying to talk to him 2 days. I've been trying to get an appointment with him.
But
I'll be on the phone tomorrow.
I'm not complaining. I'm trying to use the task force as impetus to get it done. He is the person you need to talk to about this sort of thing. So,
and I think as a township, that's the path we need to follow. Get more and more involved with our legislators,
right?
Because that's how things happen, and we just have to be the squeaky wheel, I guess.
Right. Yeah. I agree.
I want John Lawrence to know me when he meets me in the Giant. Hi, Mary. That's my goal.
With your mask on, right? But even with
With
your
my mask on, I'll paint something on the front of it. So
before we close for the evening, I did want to make a pitch for the people that are hanging the beautiful lights on Churchill Road in the township. I don't know if anybody has been down there yet in the evening. But I just wanted to say, to celebrate something like that in the township as beautiful evidence of, rural community character. I don't know if anybody has seen it yet.
No, I'd like to go. Who's Paul, are you doing that?
I don't
Fall awake at night.
I don't encourage you to visit because everybody turns around in my driveway.
I haven't turned around your driveway. I just drive straight through. It's beautiful though.
I don't mind when they turn around in my driveway as long as they keep it under 30 miles an hour.
That's reasonable.
That's really cool. That should be something, maybe somebody should go take pictures for the newsletter to let, as a community, as we keep connecting as a community. I think that's a great idea. That's nice.
An example of rural character in practice.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Good. Yeah.
So I'm behind in getting a meeting with Dave Hawking and Kathy while we're on the phone. Is there something we should be doing here?
So I had it with Janine. We had the meeting. Janine and I did anyway.
And Adam.
Dave?
I tried to find you guys, but I couldn't find you guys. So I just kept going. Dave, I was looking for you at the barn at Kenny Roberts. I drank a lot of beer looking for you, and I
didn't show up. So
I know, but thank you, because at least I got to drink a lot of beer. So that's
good.
Thanks for your effort, Kathy.
Yeah.
But there was an email to that, effect that we were going to hold that meeting, Paul, to answer your question. And whoever showed up in the scheduled Zoom time showed up, and that's who we interviewed.
Okay.
But
So-
Dave Hawking, can we somehow interview you some way, because you're important?
I don't see why you can't. The day you had the meeting, I was pretty busy that day. So
Yeah, it was during the day. I mean, I thought it was a reach to find you anyway.
I'm done harvest now. So from now till April, I'm a little slack now. So
What's the best way for Janine to get a hold of you? A cell phone or email?
cell phone.
Okay.
You can send an email, but I don't answer them, but I do read them.
So maybe Janine could call you and interview you over the phone?
Yes, that could happen.
Okay.
So, I don't have your cell phone, but I think Jeff has it, right?
Joan has it, I think.
Okay.
You may not want to give it. We're on YouTube Live.
No, that's
No, not now. Just so you can set it up. Because you can do it.
Has it?
Yeah,
Joan,
somebody
do you
has an iPhone, you can do a conference call if you want to be in on it, Paul.
Yeah, we could do a conference call.
Yep.
Yeah. Joan, do you have so
I'm checking. I've got,
I know
I know
his
Jeff
email.
has it. So.
Jeff has it.
No, yeah, all right, we'll get it somehow.
I think I do too, but let me check.
Well, that was the problem is Kathy or I don't have your cell phone, Dave, and we couldn't get you.
Well, you could probably hear what I was doing. So
I did. You drive by and I'm like, there he goes. There he goes.
And we had somebody from the Chester County Ag Development Council join the interview. So that was really interesting from a county-wide perspective to get that information.
I have it. Who should I send it to, Paul? Or
Kathy.
Janine?
Paul and myself and Nan.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to be part, just to listen in.
Okay.
I copy Nan on everything.
Yeah. Janine, I'm not real good on email either. I'm just too far behind.
So is it better to text you, Paul, to
Yeah.
set up the meeting?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So are we finished for tonight?
I think so.
All right, I think it was a good meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Okay,
Thank
good
you.
night, everybody.
All right, good
Thank
night.
you.
Happy holidays.
Yeah,
Yep.
happy holidays, right?
Everybody.
Nan drove it. Good driving, Nan. Good driving. Drove
right.
it. Good
Good
job.
Good night.
Good night.
All right.